So Muhammad actually is Majnoon. So Muhammad actually is Majnoon.
I mean, there's something obviously wrong here. You know this stuff.
Yahweh Elohim. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing, for Yahweh your God detests anyone who does this.
We open the Torah. So Yahweh, the God of the Bible, detests a man who goes around in women's clothing. Right. Anyone who cross-dresses, any man who walks around in women's clothing is detestable to the one true God. That's not the end of the matter.
I've managed to squeeze this 240 pounds of awesomeness into the only garment in my wife's dresser stretchy enough to hold it.
How in the name of common sense can you take this guy seriously? If you didn't know anything else about Christianity, just know that we're the ones who are consistent.
So Muhammad actually is Majnoon.
Being guilty of deceit.
Now, I read Nabeel's posts on Quranic preservation preparation for this debate, and he cites this one narration from which he alludes that Ibn Mas'ud attacked the Uthmanic Codex. He said, Ibn Mas'ud gave a sermon in Kufa and declared, "The people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran. I like it better to read according to the recitation of him, referring to the Prophet Muhammad, whom I love more than that of Zayd bin Thabit." The reference that Nabeel gave was Ibn Sa'd, Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir, Volume 2, page 444. So what's the problem? The problem is that this phrase does not exist in the original Arabic text. I went and I searched hard for this narration in Ibn Sa'd's book, Kitab al-Tabaqat. I found several narrations about Ibn Mas'ud talking about Zayd bin Thabit, which completely match this narration, except that this phrase, "the people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran," is not there.
I wonder what Muhammad's top teacher of the Quran has to say about it.
Let me pick up another one of these books at random. Here's one. The people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran. I like it better to read according to the recitation of him whom I love, more than that of Zayd ibn Thabit.
Wow, according to that book you're holding, Muhammad's top teacher of the Quran is saying reading today's Quran is like being guilty of deceit. I wonder if any of these other being guilty of deceit.
If you didn't know anything else about Christianity, just know that we're the ones who are consistent.
So Muhammad actually is Majnoon.
Context.
Context.
In context.
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 Context. Context.
In context. I always try to cite the Quran and Hadiths in context and accurately. I always try to cite the Quran and Hadiths in context and accurately. Don't read it as if you're reading the Quran, which has no context, which has no context, which has no context.
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 In context.
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 Context. Context.
Context.
In context. And I know that you're used to reading the Quran, which is acontextual. Don't read it as if you're reading the Quran, which has no context, which has no context. I always try to cite the Quran and Hadiths in context and accurately. You're reading the Quran, which has no context.
And how can Christianity be false when we're the ones who are speaking the truth all the time on all these topics?
So Muhammad actually is Majnoon. Be consistent, that otherwise you're inconsistent. And if you're inconsistent, you're not being honest.